From the Tapped Out Wrestling Network studios, we bring you the original Tapped Out Wrestling podcast with your host, Nick McDaniel and Myron Fancher. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another special edition, an interview edition of the Tapped Out Wrestling podcast. I am, of course, Nick. I am joined by my buddy Myron.
Hello, folks.
And today, guys, we are joined by a very special guest, the one, the only Seymour Snott. How's it going, Seymour?
Oh, it's going pretty good. I'm just drying off here. We had some rain hit the North Carolina this past weekend, and I kind of knew it was going to be bad when I saw an old man gathering up animals 2 by 2. So, thankfully enough, it's drying out.
That's good. That's good. The streams are overflowing. The streets will flow with the blood of non-believers. Well, it's good. It's good to hear you're safe up there, man. We were going through and doing some just a little bit of Google and YouTube on you, and saw some wrestling of you all the way back in '99. How long have you been doing this? How'd you get into it?
Well, actually, the way I got into wrestling was back in the mid-'90s. Of course, there really wasn't too much of an internet. So basically what it was you just kind of had to look really, really, really hard to find wrestling schools. So I actually found a book in the back of a Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and it just said, send $20 in and we can show you how to get into the world of professional wrestling. And it was written by Dennis Brent and Paul Bearer. So they actually wrote this book, which was kind of like a little manual, and, you read it. And it was, at the end of the book, they had like all these wrestling schools that were in the United States and all over the world, of course. And, they had like Al Snow's school up in Ohio, and they had a few places here and there, because back then, wrestling wasn't so open or anything like that. So I found one in Hayward, California, because I was actually in the Air Force at the time. And I said, you know what? I said, I'm going to go up there and just take a look and see what they had. And actually, they had one graduate from there. He went to ECW, and that was Spike Dudley. So I was a little guy, too, and I decided I was going to do 2 years overseas. And I said, you know what? When I get done with my overseas tour, I'm going to come back to the United States, and I'm going to go to pro wrestling school. And that was the beginning of it.
That's pretty cool, man. So you wrestled on the West Coast first, or?
Yes, I started, my first match was October 9th, 1999.
Okay. And you were not in the, you were not the geek with a physique at the time.
No,
right?
I was just simply one of the Snott brothers. I was Seymour, and I had a brother named George C. Snott, and we were just, we actually debuted as a little bit of a rule-breaking tag team, but I think the fans out in California kind of got the in-joke there, so they decided to start cheering us. So we became the good guys.
Yeah, I've watched the videos. You're real popular with the fans. You've got a lot of fan interaction. You come out to the Devo. You do the silly string. Where'd you come up with that at?
That actually came up. I came up with that probably about 15 years ago when I started wrestling singles. So I just wanted something extra to use, and I just decided to just start, pardon the expression, blow snot to the crowd. So.
That's it. That's it. Yeah, because the fans just love that. The kids are running around. That's great to see that amount of interaction, because it shows, you're over. So you're with Gouge now?
Yes, Gouge was a extension of a promotion I started with in 2002 called Southern Championship Wrestling, and that was where the Hardy Boys, Shane Helms, C.W. Anderson, Chili Willie, all those guys actually wrestled in North Carolina for that promotion, and they closed in 2004 and then reopened in 2006, and it became a little bit more of a gimmicky entertainment promotion, and I've been with them since the beginning. So,
so you're of no relation to Bastion Booger, I would guess.
No, Bastion Booger. I would say I was probably more of a relative, somewhere twice removed of maybe the Dudleys, somewhere in there.
So you got some pretty sharp and snazzy ring attire there, man. How is it to wrestle in a tie?
Well, it depends if someone's, it's great, but when someone starts choking you out, then it's kind of a disadvantage. So I like to say that I'm one of the best dressed wrestlers in the world, but unfortunately the tie does, it does hinder me a few times.
Yes, I can imagine. I have to wear one at work, and it hinders me there, so I can't imagine wrestling in one. Now, I watched a match where you were involved in a game of cornhole.
Yes.
Yeah, that's was a unique take. I don't think I've ever seen that in a wrestling match before. That was a wild. And now in this Gouge wrestling, do you wrestle with a lot of other guys with extreme gimmicks? Because when what I watched, I saw guys that were more gimmicky and guys that weren't quite as gimmicky on their performance and what they did.
Usually it depends. I think some guys, especially some wrestlers, it's like they can grasp it a little bit better than others can. And my take on it is we're entertainment. We're characters out there, and I think we should all pretty much live up to that. So I think some people in wrestling they don't understand crossing over into the entertainment showmanship portion of it. So usually there's some wrestlers that are just wrestlers, and if I'm in a match with them, it's like it's time to turn the comedy up a little bit. So
So speaking of that, you're talking about how some of the guys don't embrace it, I guess maybe is the word, as far as going to the the real extreme as far as the gimmick side. Obviously there's a personal, and we'll get there eventually, why I have an interest in your specific gimmick. But kind of tell us the thought process of, like, how did it start to where you became, how did you come to the gimmick that you got? Like that whole thought process of, like, the evolution of how you became who you are.
Well, that started, I was in wrestling school for probably a couple months or so. And, every time, and there's probably thousands of people when they come into the business and they have these ideas of what they want to do and the character they want to be. And, and I never thought in a million years, it was like, we were actually outside the ring and we were kind of goofing around, and there was a bicycle helmet and a pair of glasses, and I put them on, and my trainer was Michael Modest, and he saw me do that, and he goes, that's it. He goes, you're a nerd. That's your gimmick. You're a nerd. And I'm like, I'm a nerd. I go, I don't know if I really want to be a nerd. And then all of a sudden, a few months later, when I started finally having matches and that, I realized that the character could be fun and you could do things with it that other guys couldn't do, and so it was something that I started embracing, and it's gone through revisions over the years. So, it's something that I've pretty much evolved with as time went on.
Cool. And you've built quite a substantial following on Twitter, man, with your coffee core and all those other fans you've got, and the retweets and the tweets. Man, that's a lot of Twitter work you do.
Yeah, and I love the nerd herd. How did that, like, kind of how did that come about? Was that something you came up with, or did that kind of just organically, did someone in the crowd, or how does that come about?
It actually came about through some of my friends, because they were coming to the matches, and one of my buddies said, he says, you need to call your fans something. And I said, what do you mean? He's like, well, you need to have like a name for them or something. And I said, well, he's like, well, what do you think? He says, well, it's like, there's always like, there was the Geek Squad, and then there's like, well, how about the Nerd Herd? And that's like, oh yeah, Nerd Herd, hashtag Nerd Herd, that'll be great. And so all of a sudden, people started following along with it and getting into the character, and it's great. I love it.
Yeah, you've got some really devoted followers on there. It's refreshing to see that. Do you ever get out to any of the wrestling conventions?
I do actually. I've been to the WrestleCade and down to Fan Fest down in Charlotte are probably the two ones that I mostly go to. I'm friends with Greg Masorjak, and he works as Count Grog, and he's the one who helps. He basically runs Gouge, so he's been around the area for over 20 some years, and he's introduced me to people. I've been out to CAC in Vegas, so I like going there sometimes just to go out and meet people and that, and it's a fun time.
Now, do you geek out on the like the old school wrestlers, or are you a big fan of the modern product? What's your favorite wrestling era or time?
I would probably say I'm going to go with like 70s, 80s into the early 90s.
Oh, yes.
So I've always been kind of more, and I'm actually from Western Pennsylvania, so I've had kind of a thing about like the Pittsburgh studio wrestling and the wrestlers like the Bruno Sammartinos and the Dominic DeNucci's and the Baron Ciclunas and stuff like that. And it's such a interesting time of wrestling to watch because it was all built on, and I tell a lot of guys about this. It's like, dude, it's like these guys are getting like incredible heat with the crowd, and they're not doing anything, It's like it's amazing. So I'm more of that era. I mean, I would probably geek out really hard if I saw someone like a Davey O'Hannon or, Dominic DeNucci in public. I'd be like, oh, wow, it's Dominic DeNucci. So.
See, we grew up in the South. I grew up on Continental in Alabama. Nick was in Florida. He got to see Florida Championship Wrestling. He was lucky enough to move to Atlanta, where they had the entire 605 show on Saturday nights. What was the name of that program?
We also there was a channel here that ran a show called Superstars of Wrestling. It was an 8-hour block on Saturday nights that ran AWA, World Class, Memphis, WWF. I mean, it was pretty much all of your major promotions were on there. And like I said, it was an 8-hour block, and it was just awesome because it grew up in this area in that time because we just saw so much wrestling, in which a lot of people didn't get to see. Myron was telling stories of he saw Continental. That was his, that was what he saw. And I'm like, no, man, I'm telling him stories, AWA and, they're not World Class, that whole mix. So you grew up in that upper, so you were more of a WWF guy, I guess, at the time, WWF probably at the time, in childhood, or?
Yeah, I was more of a WWF guy, like in the mid '80s, and because we had cable television, it was like all of a sudden you got to watch like NWA, AWA, World Class, so it was like you got exposed to so many different styles and different promotions, and plus like you had the wrestling magazines all over the newsstand, so it was like wrestling was always around, and I always like some of the newer guys that come into wrestling now, and it's like, dude, it's like you just got WWE. You don't have that stuff that we had as growing up in back in, especially in the 80s, where you could see like one day you're watching AWA and you're like, oh great, the Midnight Rockers are on, and then a week later they're in the WWF. So it's like, wow, this was pretty big. So
yeah, I didn't get any of that. We did not get cable television where I grew up in Alabama until 1993.
Oh.
And not because we didn't get it, they didn't string it out there until 93. So I grew up kind of in a vacuum, but I absorbed as much as I could. Now, they recorded the Pittsburgh promotion you're talking about. Did that record at the TV station down there?
It started. I was actually like they did it at a studio, and it was actually done by the time I started watching wrestling. But like I picked up a lot of tapes and that was like some of the wrestling that I was a big fan of, especially like when you go back and I would watch like 70s WWF, because it's like there was there's always the schools of thought where they say, oh, the wrestling then wasn't as good as this promotion and that, and it's all really you can always argue the opinions in that, but as far as like today goes, you really can't do that because really you only have one show in town.
Yeah, that is kind of a detriment in my opinion. I love the WWE. Well, because it's the only thing there is really right now. But there's the characters. It's just I think we would all be better off if we had at least one competitor. And I'm hoping the stuff TNA is doing now, where it's merging and working with other federations, will help them put together a quality product, so they can compete, or at least make McMahon have to work harder.
Right.
Yeah. Have you ever wrestled for any of the bigger promotions or wrestled anywhere like that?
The biggest promotions I want to say I worked for, I did a couple California indie shows back in 2004, and they actually brought in talent from Noah. They brought in Masala came in to work a couple of the shows there. So those were probably the biggest shows I've ever been on, because like I think one match I had one match where like we were like right before Masala's match, and I'm like, wow, this is like going on before like Steve Austin or The Rock.
Oh, that's got to be awesome. That's got to be awesome.
So,
how did you wind up meeting Kevin Sullivan?
it's a funny story actually. There's I believe he's on Twitter, Sign Guy, and he hosts Turnbuckle Turmoil, and he was actually at a show, and he works up in Washington and Oregon, Pacific Northwest, and he had on one of my shirts, and Kevin Sullivan marked out for it, and thought it was great. He wanted to have it, so he gave it to him off his back and actually recorded a commercial selling my shirt. So he's like, "Oh, here, you got to watch this." So they did that, and then like after that, it was like he was putting me over huge to Kevin. He's like, "Oh yeah, you got to check out Seymour Snott. He's great and everything." And so Kevin did the commercial, and then he started putting me over on his podcast, and I'm always like, man, I'd love to have Kevin as my manager, and then of course he'd probably end up turning on me. So
that's a precedent he had in the past, I would think.
Yeah, that's a funny story. Is that's how this all came to be? Is I heard that exact one of the podcasts where Sullivan was putting you over, and I was like, we got to get this guy on. I was and so over time we've tried to track you down. And I actually have seen the commercial that you're talking about.
That's
when
priceless.
We were doing research for the show. Yeah, I saw the commercial that you're talking about, and that was actually it was pretty classic. It was pretty funny. So
Les Thatcher's not a fan of it.
Who's not?
Les Thatcher's not a fan of it. He refused. He hates my name so much he can't say it.
Well, different eras, right? And that's kind of
exactly
the thing we were talking about. Is sometimes it's the whole like some people aren't into the gimmick, some part just want and it's the different. Sometimes it's and this is kind of to the extreme. It's are you Cornette or are you Russo?
Right.
Yeah.
Do you want like the crazy storyline, or do you want old school, NWA, I joke with people all the time about Cornette. I'm like, Cornette believes wrestling should be such a certain way that he started his own territory to make sure it stayed that way, in his world. So that's a pretty hardcore, but obviously, you like the other. And I was always wanting to ask you, because, who did you kind of, to get to there, when you were younger? I know you talked about some of this, the Bruno Sammartinos and Dominic DeNucci's and that kind of thing. Like now, as far as from a character development, which guy did you look up to as far as from the character development part?
You know what? It's actually kind of funny, because I looked at stuff like guys like the Bushwhackers and Roddy Piper and Dusty Rhodes, the way that they wrestled and they worked, because it was like, and especially like I bring it up with like Bruno Sammartino and them, these guys took such an incredible ass kicking, and so like I'm the good guy, the baby face, and people are always like like, oh, what moves do you do? And it's like, I don't know, I schoolboy you up and pin you 1, 2, 3. How's that?
That quick schoolboy did a lot for the baby faces over the years.
Right.
That's a great way to get over on them. So you've what exactly is your finisher?
Well, I call that the snot drop. So it's basically it's like the X Factor that X-Pac and Conan would use. It's just basically a face buster.
Yeah, I watched it a couple times and I was trying to pin it down.
I chuckled at the name. I'm like, that's classic. I love when guys don't. You can steal a move, but the name, you've always got to come up with your own name. That's always a good. And anytime you can tie it into the character, that's always a good thing. But other things that I was looking at while I was doing some research, you've worked for a lot of promotions: Gouge, APW, PWX, CWF Mid Atlantic, Big Time Wrestling, Rage Wrestling. I mean, you've actually been around a pretty good bit. Wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, I've and I mean at this point, wrestling for about almost 18 years, and that it's like I'm pretty content with where I've been and everything. There's only like maybe a couple other promotions I really want to work for, and I'd say like something like a Chikara or Wrestle Circus or Old Time Wrestling or something like that. So
Chikara. That's the really way out there.
Oh yeah.
I think. Do you think you'd fit in good with those guys? Do you think that kind of style would benefit you?
You know what? I can go in there with. I would be happy to go in there and get my clock cleaned by Chuck Taylor, the original one, and that's the dream match right there. Chuck Taylor and Seymour Snott.
Oh, that would be cool to see.
And that's funny. That's actually one of my regular questions is, what's a dream match? If you could have one opponent, who would that be? If you could have any opponent, no questions asked, like you would have that match, who would that be?
Yeah, that would be Chuck Taylor. The other one, unfortunately, since he passed away, I'd probably say the original Doink. So that would be an evil clown. That'd be.
Oh, that would be so over. It's not even funny. That would be so over. It's not even funny. That Chikara, I've not really gotten to see a lot of the program. I see mainly the wrestlers on Twitter more. Your gimmick might work with those guys. There's some odd ones, but it looks like they take it seriously enough about having fun and making it interesting. And
yeah, it's like a comic book come to life, pretty much.
Well, that's got to be entertaining right there. Now, what was it like the first time you got into the ring?
Well, it was I'd been practicing and training for so long, and you can do that so many times, but when you get out in front of a live crowd, it's 1,000 times different. So I was happy that I got to do it, and I was like, this is what it's all about, building up to this moment. It was actually a lot of fun.
So it was that in California?
Yes, it was I'm trying to think. No, it was somewhere in the East Bay. I know it was close to the school. It was actually Crash Holly's former high school. So Pacifica, California. That's where it was at.
Wow. So they had it in an old high school.
Yep.
Now, has this worked with you? Do your friends and family understand what wrestling is and how it works, or how are they accepting of what you do for a living?
My family's pretty cool with it. I've never had any real problems with it at all. My friends and coworkers, they think it's hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just one of those things, especially like my Air Force friends, they were always like, "Oh yeah, you always said you were going to do it, and you did it." So it's one big goal that I accomplished. So
well, that's something a lot of people can't say.
Good there.
Yeah.
Right.
Y'all work a lot of different venues. You're working fairs and firehouses and stuff like that. Y'all get around, don't you?
Yes. The one we always do that's pretty big is we do the 4th of July for the city of Raleigh.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the biggest show we do, and we've been doing a lot of breweries in the last couple of years. So once that alcohol starts flowing, the fans really, really get into it. So you get some wild crowds then.
I travel through North Carolina back and forth on the way to see the girlfriend's family in Maryland, and there's probably aren't there a lot of breweries popping up there?
Yes, there are. They're actually, and I think they're a lot more. They're a little bit more fun, I think, than your regular bar or anything. Because when you do a brewery show, it's pretty much open to all ages and that, and you don't really have a whole lot of, it's not like a bar where it's more or less enclosed. Brewery's a little bit more open. You've got things like food trucks. People are having a lot more fun. There's some music playing, so it's a good environment for wrestling. I think it's one of the best new environments for wrestling now.
That's cool. That seems like that would be a great environment, like almost a festival type thing.
Oh yeah, and plus, when you're outside too, it's not as it's not as constricting as it is when you're in a building. So
Yeah.
you don't have to worry about the ring trying to fit through a small door.
Oh yeah, that's got to be a lot of work to set up that ring and take it down at the end of the show. Is the ring itself now? I've seen the pictures, but I've never actually been in a wrestling ring before. I've been next to one. I've seen them. I've leaned on them. But as far as the way, when you hit that on that gouge ring, it makes a lot of noise. Is it harder, you think, than a WB type ring, or?
It's a little bit. It's a little harder. It's the independent, so there's a little. It's not like we have the professional WWE ring or a TNA ring, but it's definitely something that you learn to work in, and you definitely it makes you a lot smarter on how you on how everything flows. I'll put it to you that way.
So has it ever hurt you?
You know what? There's been misplaced boards, and yes, there has.
Oh,
I have cut my shin on the edge of the ring before, so
ow.
That's when I started going back to wearing boots again. So.
Now you've got to learn how to take a bump on that specifically, then, don't you?
Yes, but that was why wrestling school is important for everybody. So it teaches you how to bump. So
yeah, that's the thing. That's the fascinating thing to me is how you do the moves without getting hurt. And after watching wrestling for probably nearly 40 years, I still don't understand how that happens. Whereas you can see stuff like a tombstone pile driver or a pedigree where somebody's good can keep their head from hitting the mat. But just the average bumps, I don't see how y'all just don't get killed on them. Oh,
yeah.
Would you say that you just over time that you just become callous to the bump? Is that kind of that's what I've always heard Austin say that on his podcast. He's like it's called ring shape.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like you get used to it over time, and I would probably say I was in wrestling as long as I have been now. You do feel a little bit more, but especially when you first start, you get used to it, and it kind of toughens you up. So, and you learn once you take that first bad bump not to do it again. So,
now, do you spend a lot of time in the gym to get that geek physique?
I do. I try and at least go about 4 or 5 times a week to the gym. I think being in shape it helps out so much when you're in the ring because, there's a lot of guys that unfortunately they don't take advantage of it, and then they're always like, "Oh, I'm hurt," and it's like you got to get in shape, brother. So.
Yeah, keep the cardio up and keep the muscular development up. You lift a lot of weights mainly, or?
I try to do mostly weights, and I do a little bit of cardio. So as you kind of get used to in your matches, you know where to place things and not to basically wear yourself out. So.
Yeah. Well, you move around really well. That's one thing I noticed from your matches. You get around the ring well, and it you don't see that in some wrestlers. You know, a lot of wrestlers, some of the guys you work with are stiffer. They don't seem to move as well, and you seem to be able to get around and do more. It's probably why Sullivan was so impressed with you.
Yeah,
He,
I think it was probably because I spent a couple years living in the wrestling school, so
picking up everything in the dojo
yeah.
like a grasshopper
Yeah.
from Kung Fu.
So, and I'm gonna, doing our research, it kind of triggered me. I wanted to ask you because you were talking about, living at the school. I saw that, you said Mike Modest was your trainer. Was he your primary trainer?
Yeah, I had Mike Modest, and then there was Donovan Morgan. There was Frank Murdoch. He's like, I think he was Dick Murdoch's nephew, I want to say. And then there was Vinny Massaro. He's worked out on the West Coast for years. So, and Crash Holly came in a few times to train with us. So he was actually the person that taught me how to do an Irish whip the right way. So.
Oh. Yeah, I remember him back in the day in the WWE. He was a amusing little fellow, and he was just a great talent. I'm sad that he's passed away now. He'd have had I probably had a pretty good future in the business. Now, have you got?
Oh, go ahead.
No. You tell your story.
Oh, yeah, he was actually, and it was funny because he was one of the guys. I mean, he when he was on the independents, he did so much, and it wasn't until he went to the WWE that it was like, I don't have to do so much anymore because I'm doing comedy now, so I can be as silly and as goofy as I can, and we all remember him being the Houdini of hardcore. So.
Yes.
And I'll actually ask you the follow up to that question because it's something that I've always wondered. Santino, Crash, obviously you're talking about the comedy, how it's a little bit of an easier. Do you find that helps you in your career, that doing the comedy, you don't have to, and I mean no disrespect when I say this because this is not my term. Do you not feel like you have to have a spot fest, like because you can work a match with your angle, your story, your gimmick, and it kind of helps preserve your body. You can kind of work smarter versus working harder in a grand scheme of things.
Oh yeah, definitely. I actually prefer it a lot more. I mean, and the thing is too is like I think a lot more wrestlers are kind of more into the whole, I've got to get this move in, I've got to do this move and this move, and it's like, that's great for you, but for me it's getting my nose grabbed or my tie stepped on. So
Mm-hmm.
well,
you pop back into kayfabe and character in the ring in the middle of matches, and you can tell you're hamming it up out there. That's got to throw your opponents off. You had recommended me watching some stuff with you and Jacob Hammermeyer, or is it Jacob, as the announcer says? Or
Jacob.
Jacob. Were those your favorite matches?
You know what? They actually were. I had a chance to work with him a couple years ago when he first came into Gouge, and it was just one of those natural rivalries we had. And I think that's what a lot of guys, they don't see the bigger picture sometimes of working with someone and wanting to put together something that can actually be interesting for people to talk about and have like a reason to come back and see you guys again. I mean, it's like, you look how many times like Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes had matches against each other. You look how many times Jerry Lawler and Austin Idol had matches together. So when you develop that chemistry with someone, I think it gets more people interested in the product overall.
Oh, it's that connection. Yeah, I can definitely understand that.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that I do complain about quite a bit, and I feel bad when I complain about things because I do love the business so much. It's that they don't take the time. With WWE, there's a pay-per-view every single month for our brand, so it's like we got to wrap the story up to get to the next one. And I'm like you. I grew up in an era where it would be, I would remember watching Lawler and Dundee out of Memphis. A feud would last 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. And it was just over the period of time you would progress. The match would progress. The story, we would get chapter 1, 2, and 3, exactly what you're talking about. Like, let's get a grand, a bigger picture storyline where the crowd, they want to come back next week versus coming out and having just a huge, just a spot fest. And I hate that term, I know, but I use it, I have to. But a spot fest, and then the show's over, and then they're not, the next week the story's over. And I'm like,
right.
give me a reason to bring them back. You know what I mean?
I think like the one that always got me as a kid, and it's always like I think my favorite period of time was when, I want to say it was in the summer of '80.
Hello?
All of a sudden, by the fall of '86, after a couple months, you started to see the Piper Adonis feud building up, and you started to see the Steamboat Savage feud building up, and and Hogan and Andre was starting to build up, and all of it led to WrestleMania, and it was huge. And it's like now, it's like I watched like this past year, I'm watching Mania, and I'm like, man, it's like, did they pick these matches out of a hat and put them on there?
There were quite a few I felt that way about. I totally feel you there. They don't let something go long enough to see it's going to work. They just toss it out and go on to something else if it's not just doing gangbusters right off the bat. And wrestling, comic books, things like that, that's where they're in common. You have to find the hero and the villain or the storyline, and they're all the same stories that you've been around since Shakespeare. It's just how they put the different people in and work it. It's the dynamic of characters interacting, whether it be on a stage for a play or in a wrestling ring, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Batman and the Joker. How many times has that story been retold? You got some pretty sweet Batman tattoos, so I take it you're a big Batman fan?
You know what? It's becoming harder and harder to be a Batman fan these days, because it's like I keep watching the stuff DC Comics does, and I'm like, oh God, what are you going to do to him this time? So,
well, who's your favorite Batman?
Well, actually, and I hate to really say it, but like my favorite Batman was probably Val Kilmer, because the thing was like he was almost like a comic book character. And, he kind of, I would say him and Christian Bale are probably up there. Overall, though, like, and even going back to that, I'll even go with Adam West.
Oh, yeah.
He was, to a lot of people, he acted more like Batman. And, everybody now, it's like they've got to be depressed or angry. And I'm like, it's a comic book movie. We don't have to go this depressing route. So...
Mm-hmm. Well, they've played Batman dark. Now, there are times to see him as a darker character. There might be more of a time to see him as an Adam West type character in a movie and see what happens. Nick, where's your thoughts on the way it's going?
Well, everybody always asks me this because obviously we knew we were going to go here because one of our mutual interests is we're both really into comics. And when it comes to Batman, I do like Batman. He is one of the better. He's typically one of the more well written books. But for some reason, I just always leaned Green Lantern and Flash. For some reason, those were always two. And I'll tell you a corny story, and it's about me, and then I'll ask you your take on it. Everybody asks me why Green Lantern, and it's funny because you'll actually probably appreciate the story, Seymour. The reason I typically go Green Lantern is I try to tell parents when I used to own a comic book store decade ago. And I used to say, get them to read Green Lantern. And they would say, why? I go, the principle of this character, essentially at the heart of it, teaches your kid, if you have the will, you can make anything happen. And so that's the core of the character. I said, whether there's all of us other space and all this other stuff going on, at the core of it, that's what you can tell your child, is that if you have the willpower, you can make anything happen. I mean, so that was kind of why I always leaned the Green Lantern. So that's just me. And then the Flash is just because I'm into time travel, etc., those kind of things. So, which is, of course, we talked about it a little bit off air. I'm with you. The Flash, hands down, is probably I think the best TV show that they've got out right now. Just my opinion. So I'll ask you. So what's as far as books wise, because we'll probably have to go through stages of this with where society's gone at this point. Isn't it nice it's actually kind of cool to be nerd now. It didn't pay. It didn't pay to be that way.
There's businesses that just cater to nerds.
Yeah.
Think Geek, Second and Charles.
Yeah, that's a different one here. Yeah. So kind of go through and like I said, we'll gotta come back to wrestling, but I'm just interested as big of a nerd and it's a cool word to say now that you can say it and it not be bad. As comics go, like who is Batman your guy? Was that your go-to book, or what were some of your other favorites, and how far back do you go?
You know what? I go back to probably the early '80s on comics. I liked Batman, but like I wasn't fully into Batman for a while. And what it was it took me probably when year one came out. That's when I really became a Batman fan, because I thought they drew it. The art was great. The story was good. I was like, okay, so this is like his origin. I like this, and it was a little bit modern. Before that, I read a lot of Marvel. Like I read G.I. Joe a lot because I was into the toys.
Oh, I remember those. 65 cents.
I love G.I. Joe. I would occasionally pick up a Green Lantern comic every once in a while, because I was, I grew up and I saw that stuff on Super Friends, and I was like, oh wow, the DC characters, to me, they were more colorful, and I think they had they were a lot more powerful than most of the Marvel characters that I saw at the time. And, I didn't get into X-Men or anything, until like the mid 80s and that. And even then I wasn't that big of an X-Men fan. I'd buy like an issue here, an issue there just for Wolverine, basically. Yeah. But, pretty much through the late 80s, I was into Batman heavily. And then into the 90s and that, I still remain, I was still a fan and that. The hard part about being a Batman fan was the fact that the movies would come out, and I think they would have to try and change the character in the comics a little bit to, like they did the whole Broken Bat saga, and, and then they did stuff where Batman died a few years ago, but he was really stuck in time. So, I don't know. I think it's like, especially in DC now, I'm more of a fan of the Silver Age as opposed to anything that's been done modernly. If that makes any sense. I think everything now is kind of, I'm not really a fan of the artwork or anything as much as I used to be, like as the older books were. So, but, like as far as like DC goes, like, we all have our favorites. It's like you think of the big three, it's Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, but then you have characters like, I have a Plastic Man action figure on my wall and a Martian Manhunter figure too. So, they've got some really odd characters that I think are just, they're very underrated. And I'm like, well, why don't you put some of these characters in the Justice League movie you're making? They'd make it a little bit more interesting.
I remember the old Plastic Man cartoon when I was a kid. That was awesome. Yeah, the DC had the color characters. Marvel tried to get grittier and more down to like everyday life and stuff like that. And the heroes, you focus more on their interactions in the daily world and with people and how they reacted among. And DC had that giant, super powerful Superman out there, and the characters were so much larger than life. I've always really enjoyed the Marvel more, but I like the DC television and the DC animated stuff.
Yes.
Like,
I think.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say probably the best DC that I had ever seen was probably The New Frontier. I think that's my favorite all-encompassing Justice League movie I think they've ever done in animation. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can sit there and watch those on. I will use the Amazon service and watch the DC movies nonstop. I've bought a bunch of them recently. I've got to catch myself up on. But the Batmans are so super dark and well done. The Kevin Conroy voicing the Mark Hamill doing the the Joker. It's just too good. It's entertaining and it's well written.
Yeah, when it comes to comics, like I said, I think DC does the TV shows a little better. They do the animated a lot better, to be honest with you. And but when the movies, Marvel's kind of got a headlock on it, no pun intended, on that part of the business. When it comes to books, it's just you could tell the funny part is everybody gives me a hard time about comics. Do you still collect at all, or?
Usually, like I if I buy anything, I buy like the collected editions, and I like to keep my stuff mostly like 80s and 70s or 70s and 80s kind of stuff. I couldn't really get into anything that was done in the 90s. The only thing I got into the 90s was if they did comics based off the Batman animated series, because I thought the artwork was great.
Yeah.
And it was a simpler story that was being told. And with the other Batman comics, especially the ones that were main, the main DC ones, it's like, they were, they'd have someone die or they reintroduce someone, and then it was a little bit, it was grittier, and then they try to kill off a character, but they bring him back. So I was like, you know what? You lost me there.
Yeah, that's typically why, as far as the collector side goes, it's funny. I do lots of digital books now, as far as the new stuff goes, just to kind of keep up. It's just easier. And then as far as collecting goes, I'm just a Silver Age guy. It's really hard for me to buy anything later. I do have a Death of Superman, hung on my wall. The actual all of the books, they're all up on the wall, 7 of them. Just kind of in an arc showing the storyline, because that was kind of like typically, like most of us, we fall out of it for a minute and then we kind of come back into it. That was kind of what yanked me back in. So I have that, but otherwise, I've got like Green Lantern 7 on the wall, just Silver Age stuff. I always tell people, if you're going to collect Silver Age. If you want to read everything. I mean, that's just kind of my.
I kind of got lost on Batman and Superman when they lost their trunks. I was like, they went to the onesie suits, and I was like, oh, good grief! I wasn't a fan of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, I know me. I could talk comics all day. I know, if you're into it like I am, probably the same. The thing with nerds is, man, we can almost buddy up with anybody when it comes to, and it's kind of it crosses over very much so. If you like comics or you like wrestling, it's not hard to find friends.
No.
Because the second you find somebody that'll talk it to you, I mean, I remember I got friends that to this day that I've made 20 years ago that I'm friends with, that it all started with wrestling. Have you ever, and this is just curiosity, have you ever heard of a gentleman named Terry the Rocker Lawler?
I think I have.
He wrestles mainly here in Georgia, but I knew he went up there to, God, what was that? It was in North Carolina. Was it Erie, North Carolina? He did
a wrestling show up there.
Show up there. I actually asked him one time, I was like, if you ever come across Seymour Snott, let him know. I went to high school with Terry. And Terry's been in the business for about he's coming up on 20-something years this year. So he's been around for a while. But that's what I mean, is I met him sitting at the lunch table in high school, and it was just like, hi, talk about wrestling. Well, little did I know at the time when he said, yeah, my brother wrestles. His brother was Steve the Brawler Lawler down here in Georgia.
Oh, okay.
And so, but it was, it's kind of one of that thing. And then voila, got a friend for 20-something years, right? Because if you don't let your wrestling friends go, they can do a lot of bad things, but you don't let your wrestling friends go because we hold on to them because we've always got something in common.
Yeah.
But obviously we're going to come back to wrestling now. Obviously, we always get sidetracked with comics. I don't know how that happens on our show. It just happens very easily. But as far as typical things when it comes to wrestling, go ahead. Myron had a question.
What are your goals as a wrestler? What are you trying to do long term?
You know what? I would like to just I'd like to take Gouge, and do more with it. I think that it's got a great name. It's got a good, it's something that can definitely be branded, I think, and there can be more done with it, as far as I've started training guys, and I think that adding more talent to the roster that's kind of homegrown adds more, and it just kind of grows the promotion. I see, hopefully like a Gouge wrestling school would be great. So that's something that would probably be long term.
So if you're training these guys, and this is because this is typically a question I love to ask, is when you're training these guys, what's your like biggest piece of advice that you could tell somebody that's getting into the business, saying like right out of the gate, like what's the first thing you want to say to them?
Be in shape.
Yeah.
Be prepared for the pain. That's a good one too.
Oh God, I can only imagine. I get stiff walking them downstairs.
Some days that happens. Yeah. And it's kind of what we hear. It's all about the training, and it's all about, you got to love it. I always get that a lot. Terry tells me that a lot. You got to love it. Some nights you're going to make $25. Some nights you're going to make 15. Some nights you're going to make 500. It just depends. But you got to love it. You just got to want to do it. And that's a big, big plus. But I do agree with the whole, being in shape is a lot of the guys you hear, because, a lot of people look back in the day and they'll say, well, there was Dusty Rhodes, right? He didn't have the physique, but I would look at them and argue Dusty could go 60 minutes with Ric Flair. You didn't look it, but Dusty was in shape somehow, some way. He could work for 60 minutes. So it's all about ring shape, I guess is the word you're talking about.
Well, yeah. I'm sorry, I keep talking.
That's okay.
No, I'm just getting excited. I mark out a lot, and get to talk about the old guys. It's just, my little thing. One of my triggers.
I don't think we have the big guys anymore. I think everything's gone a little bit smaller, and I think it would be good to see a lot more larger wrestlers again, because I think we all came from that era where it was like, the smallest guy in the card was like 220 pounds.
Oh yeah. But I think the cruiserweights are turning out great work right now.
Yeah, I think the only critique I'd give about the cruiserweights is that there's guys on the main roster that are doing the same moves. So that would be the only thing I would say that's kind of there. But then I would add, if it's that way, I would add a little bit something different to the cruiserweights, like maybe like a 6-man tag team title instead of just a regular cruiserweight tag team title or something, So something to make it a little different than the main guys, I guess.
Yeah, I've said the same exact critique on our show, where on the same episode you'll have, this was back when they were before the brand split last year. It'd be Luke Harper would do the suicide dive through the second rope, and then pick a cruiserweight at any point. It doesn't matter at this point. Does the exact same move, and I'm like, okay, am I supposed to believe that hurts any more than Luke Harper? Because Luke Harper's got 80 pounds on him or something.
I think with the cruiserweights though too is I think they almost have to be marketed like comic book characters or superheroes, because they're working a faster paced style, and I think that especially when people were into the WCW cruiserweights. I mean, you had guys from Mexico and Japan, and you had the Chris Jerichos and the Eddie Guerreros, who were pretty much the North Americans. So it was like you had all these different styles, and they're trying to do the sports entertainment angles with the guys that are basically the pure athletes of the division. So it's just something I think gets a little lost.
Got to put a little flash of their skill to differentiate them.
They need a little sizzle on the steak.
Yeah. Austin Aries is a guy I think doing it well.
Oh yeah, and plus like he's been around for so long too.
Oh yeah.
So.
Oh God, yeah. Now, do you see yourself being a booker one day?
You know what? It'd probably be something that I would do. I wouldn't have a problem with it at all. It's just, I've worked with some pretty good guys that have put together some good shows. So it's like, really, it's almost like, it's kind of like playing chess. You have to move the pieces in a certain way across the board. So
that's a good analogy.
Absolutely. And so that's, I guess, now long term, like you said, I know you had earlier, the trainings where you'd like to go, and and I don't like to rush you down that road, but I always like to ask how, you've been in it, you said now for 18 years.
Yes.
How long do you see yourself still doing this?
I would say probably a couple more. If I hit 20, I'll be fine. So I can at least close out on an even note right there.
That would be a hell of a run. I mean, 20 years is a hell of a run, no matter where, right? Yeah. That's a hell of a run.
Right.
Well, man, it has been awesome having you on. But before we go, we always like to tell you, before we let you out of here, we know you've got some things that you could, let your fans know where to find you, product and all that good stuff. So we always let you get, the floor is yours for a few minutes to plug anything that you want to plug. So floor is yours, man.
Thanks. I can be found on Facebook at Seymour Snott, and that's Snott with 2 T's. That's where my fan page is. I'm on Twitter at Seymour Snott. That, of course, is with 2 T's again. And I'm actually on Instagram at SuperSnott1. So there's 2 T's and 1. So that makes it all even right there. Basically, I've got T-shirts, 8x10s, buttons, stickers. So they're all up for sale. So if you want to hit me up, just contact me on any of those platforms on social media.
Well, I will give you a testimonial on those T-shirts. They are wonderful shirts. My stepson, who is 16, totally marked out about the comic book one, which is really cool. I see what Kevin Sullivan said.
That's what I was about to say. I mean, it's such a good shirt. Kevin Sullivan marked out over the shirt. So.
My daughter is 13 and she only wears black and maybe T-shirts of bands I've never heard of on there. So it didn't go over well with her. She's not a wrestling fan, but the wrestling fans and the comic book people in my household just went nuts over it. Okay. I got the good 8x10 picture, and I saw that decal you snuck in there.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I got to find a good place to put that. I have to put it on some of my podcast stuff.
Absolutely. But check it out. All of those that he just said, definitely check out the shirts. Like we said, if you don't want to take just our word for it, Kevin Sullivan, take his word for it. Yes. Trust me. Get you a shirt and the other merchandise, hit you up. And, man, it's been an absolute pleasure. Hopefully this won't be the last. Hopefully we have you back on again sometime.
Oh, I'd love to be back. Thank you very much, Nick and Myron.
I really appreciate this. Thank you, Seymour.
All righty, buddy.
You're a hell of a gentleman.
All right, you're welcome.
Well, we'd like to thank our special guest this week, Mr. Seymour Snott, for joining us today, talking about training, the indies, of course, even things from WWE to Marvel Comics. I mean, who knew, right, that we would have a guy on from the nerd herd, and then we would end up talking comics. Considered I'm a diehard comic guy, I kind of figured it would probably go there. But, again, we'd like to thank Seymour for coming on and joining the show today. Before we get out of here, guys, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, anything for Seymour or for us, you can email us at tappedoutwrestlingpodcast@gmail.com, tappedoutwrestlingpodcast@gmail.com. You can also reach us at Facebook at Tapped Out Wrestling Podcast Network. You can also reach us on Twitter at Tapped Out Pod. That is at Tapped Out Pod. Shoot us messages there. If there's somebody that you would like, for us to try to get, somebody that the indies. We're striving a lot to promote the independent circuits right now. It's kind of our target demographic as far as the audience goes, and as far as the superstars we have on. Again, you can reach us at Tapped Out Pod. Also, you can find us on our webpage at tappedoutwrestlingpodcast.com, tappedoutwrestlingpodcast.com. We suggest you always go there, just simply for the fact that, hey, you can find everything. We're on, the iTunes, the Google Play, the Blog Talk Radio. You can subscribe to all the stuff there and find us. Of course, always, while you're there, support the sponsors of the show. We've got the Fight app, which hosts some great wrestling. It also has MMA, boxing, grappling as well. But we know our diehards are more of the pro wrestling guys, so you can find wrestling on there like Impact Wrestling, Ring of Honor, ICW, Throwback Championship Wrestling, Rockstar Pro. There's lots and stuff. Chaotic Wrestling. I mean, it's all on there. Some of it's free. Some of it's, the pay-per-views, obviously, that are on there as well. But we definitely recommend you check it out. We've got some big surprises coming soon where we're going to be giving away some maybe giving away some cash so you can get some pay-per-views on there, some credits. We'll have some more details coming out on that soon as far as how do you win those. Also, check out our Amazon affiliate link on there. Pretty simple, guys. We just ask you to replace your old Amazon bookmark that you're currently using with our bookmark. That's it. Make your purchases like regular, nothing special, no extra purchases. Doesn't cost you a dime. They'll just kick a little bit of referral commission our way just for sending you over there. Help support the show. We greatly appreciate it. We're going to keep trying to get you these great guests and, help cover some of that overhead with that Amazon cost. Again, we would like to thank Mr. Seymour Snott for coming on. Hopefully we'll have him on again soon. Look forward to a few more interviews that we've got coming. We do have a indie superstar here in the state of Georgia who is going to be also, he travels, he does some Alabama, Tennessee, North Carolina. He hits the circuit pretty hard. He is a indie superstar. His name is O'Shea Edwards. Definitely you want to check that one out. That one's going to be out next week. Definitely check out that. We got a few more lined up, so hopefully we should have a couple more interviews for you next week as well. We appreciate you guys joining us for these episodes, and we hope you enjoy them, and we hope to see you soon.